Ghost Story, Demon's Seduction. It was nearing midnight as I walked steadily along the familiar dirt road. Tonight being the 15th day of the lunar month, the moon still peeked through the branches of the trees. The air was chilly, with occasional gusts of wind rustling the leaves by the deserted road, carrying the early season cold. I tucked my hand into my woolen coat for warmth, surveying the somewhat gloomy surroundings, letting out a sigh before heading towards Auntie Goo's noodle stand. In the distance, under the faint glow of a lantern swaying near a cluster of withered trees, I spotted a few figures seated outside the stand. Auntie Goo's stand was parked next to the ancient beehive-shaped stone graves, always emitting thick incense smoke, lending an eerie, solemn atmosphere. Perhaps that's why people dubbed Auntie Goo's noodle stand the underworld noodle stand. This area was still sparsely populated, with each house separated by vast stretches of fields, and the narrow dirt roads barely accommodating passage. Electricity hadn't even reached here yet. Despite this, Auntie Goo's noodle stand had been in existence for nearly 20 years now. Every night, around midnight, she would diligently push her cart out to sell noodles until dawn. I heard stories that sometimes she wouldn't sell a single bowl, yet she persisted in this unpredictable livelihood. Approaching the bamboo table, I realized the figures from earlier were Uncle 2BN, now in his 50s, living several acres away from my home, and the man sitting next to him was Mr. Quatch, a few years older than me. I greeted them politely. Uncle 2 looked up and upon seeing me, grinned and said, "Hey there, How? When did you return without letting Uncle 2 know? Come sit down." "Last time I visited your home for tea and gossip with your dad, where were you?" I sat down slowly and replied, "Oh, I just got back this morning. I remembered Auntie Goo's noodles were particularly delicious, so I decided to drop by to eat and visit Auntie Goo." I glanced at Auntie Goo, who nodded gently, handing me a steaming bowl of noodles. "Are you doing well, young man?" she asked. "Yes, Auntie, I'm doing fine," I replied. She nodded. Auntie Hai chuckled softly before quietly turning away. She was always like that, sparing with words but incredibly kind-hearted, her face always tinged with a hint of sadness. Uncle 2BN reached for a cigarette, took a long drag, and then gently exhaled a thin wisp of white smoke into the hazy yellow light cast by the swaying lantern, piercing through my shadow on the uneven stone road, momentarily freezing the scene. Mr. Quatch took a sip of tea and patted my shoulder. "How? I heard you can see ghosts. Is that true? I don't believe it, so I want to hear it from your own mouth." Before I could respond, a loud clatter interrupted us, as Auntie Hai accidentally dropped a bowl of noodles. Her expression seemed oddly different at that moment. Mr. Quatch pressed on. "Is it true? How?" Feeling awkward, I quickly shrugged and forced a laugh. "People gossip, but you shouldn't believe everything you hear." I swiftly changed the subject. "Uncle 2, why do those graves always have thick incense smoke? Is Auntie Hai the one lighting them?" "Yeah, that's right. Every time she goes out to sell, she lights incense for those graves. Once the incense burns out, she lights another one until she's done. Can't you see? She keeps a dozen bundles of incense on the shelf there." After Uncle 2 finished, he gestured towards the noodle cart. "Are those graves related to Auntie Hai?" I asked. "I'm not sure, but it's probably just a courtesy when using the space for business. It's like, out of respect for the deceased, so they'll bless her business," Uncle 2 explained. I nodded silently, intending to pick up the bowl of noodles to warm myself, when Uncle 2 spoke solemnly. "Speaking of graves, let me tell you a terrifying story about vengeful spirits that I'll never forget." At that moment, a gentle, chilling breeze swept through us, the rustling leaves adding an eerie touch to Uncle 2's mysterious tale. He raised his weathered arm, took another drag from his cigarette, and began his story. "Uncle, do you remember that rainy season years ago when you were still healthy? Every time it rained at night, you and the other young men in the neighborhood would gather to light torches and go frog hunting. That night, after Aunt Two put the kids to bed, you grabbed your bamboo frame, lit a torch, and sneaked out through the foliage on the side of the house. Aunt Two noticed and asked, 'Where are you going in that direction?' 'I'm going frog hunting.' 'What else?' you replied. 'Usually, you go with the other boys to the fields near Group 1, but this is towards the riverbank. Why are you going there?' she questioned. 'The others went too far that way, so I'm heading towards the Group 5 fields to see if there's a good harvest,' you explained. But what? Hurry up, it's getting late,' you interrupted. 'I heard the river behind our house often has dirty things at night.' 'People say so a lot,' Aunt Two hesitated, listening to your response, then waved dismissively. 'You always listen to those exaggerated stories. I'm going now.' You silently walked into the night, wading through the dense foliage straight to the back of the house. Back then, the forest was thick, not like now, and you didn't even think about ghosts or demons. Darkness enveloped you. Only the chorus of frogs and the crackling of torches echoed around, occasionally accompanied by the splash of a torch fragment hitting the water, creating a faint, sour sound. You crossed the forest, reached the river, and stealthily pushed out the small boat hidden among the rocks. Placing the torch on the boat's edge, you slowly paddled, the riverbanks lined with coconut trees and tall, tangled vines. Aunt Two mentioned this because there was a tragic incident on this river. A family was attacked one dark night, their heads chopped off, and their bodies thrown into the river, all 5 of them. No one knew why, but it was rumored they were robbed. This area was chaotic back then. The bodies were buried right next to the house, but now there's no trace of the graves. Locals whispered that at night, they often saw the shadowy figures of the 5 headless people standing by the riverbank, waving their hands. Some even claimed to have seen figures flying back and forth across the river, but you never believed those nonsense stories. You were known for your courage. At that moment, you thought nothing of it, leisurely paddling on the water. The moonlight painted an unusual calmness on the water's surface, and even the frogs seemed to quiet down, yielding to the occasional distant meow echoing as if from another world. You swam for a while until suddenly, the torch extinguished with a puff, and you thought, "Strange, there's hardly any wind to put out the torch." Lost in your vague thoughts, you didn't anticipate the impending danger. It wasn't until you lifted your head to look around that the surroundings became clearer without the torch. Silence. That's the word to describe the scene at that moment. You continued paddling, the water rippling beside the boat, the dying torch casting a faint glow in the dark night, flickering on the waves like wandering ghosts, its ashes occasionally flickering up into the pitch-black sky, eerie and gloomy. Boom! 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 You froze upon hearing the strange sound in the dead of night, resembling someone swimming in the river. Your hands gripped the oar tightly as you strained your eyes towards the direction of the sound. Far off, near the coconut grove, the water seemed to be disturbed, but in that darkness, you couldn't see anything except an endless blackness along both riverbanks. You thought to yourself, could it be chicken thieves? Duck thieves? Determined, you grabbed a pruning knife and slowly paddled closer. As you approached, only a few meters away, the clouds obscured the moonlight, casting a dim light onto the river, revealing a terrifying sight before you. A pale, soaking wet face grinned maliciously, its body bruised and purplish, with something gaping and oozing on its neck, looking horrifying. You gasped, dropping the knife from your hand, barely managing to keep calm and not fall into the river. Its intense, eerie gaze seemed to send an electric shock down your spine. Before you could react, it darted swiftly onto the shore, running towards a clump of trees that protruded into the river. It effortlessly climbed up onto the branch, then swung itself like a monkey, laughing eerily, a vengeful echo resounding in all directions. A nearby heron took off, and at that moment, you dared not look up anymore. It took a long time for you to regain your composure, your hands gripping the oar, shaking violently, like someone with a fever. You tried to climb up quickly, but for some reason, the boat only moved inch by inch. What's even more horrifying is when the prow of the boat reached the tree branch. Suddenly, a head fell with a thud onto the bow of the boat. The same eerie, piercing gaze, the same terrifying laughter as the head bounced up and down before plopping into the river. Unable to contain yourself any longer, you swung the paddle around, using all your strength to swim as fast as you could back towards the house. You dared not look back, not even making a sound, your throat tightening with fear. But the ordeal wasn't over yet. As you turned the boat to flee, you heard something fall from above behind you with a loud thud, a sense of impending doom looming. Indeed, behind you, the rushing sound of water approached, and you paddled furiously, each stroke driven by panic. Suddenly, there was a distinct, continuous thumping from under the boat, followed by a bony arm reaching up from below, grabbing onto the edge of the boat near your feet. Terrified, you leaped into the water and swam straight to shore, sprinting frantically. Broken branches littered the ground underfoot. Upon reaching home in one breathless dash, you collapsed to the ground, gasping for air as if near death. Aunt Tu, seeing you in such a state, cried out in terror, fearing you had been struck by some unseen force. The next morning, as you gradually regained consciousness, you recounted everything to Aunt Tu, her face drained of color as she hurriedly summoned a traditional herbalist and then a monk for blessings. You remained bedridden for an entire week, only able to sit up after that. Since then, you've never dared to pass by that river at night again, and even when frog hunting, you always went with a group. It wasn't until Aunt Tu recounted the story later that you realized how skilled Mr. Nam, the exorcist, was back then. Hearing Chutubin's story, I quickly interjected. "Which Mr. Nam are you talking about, Chu?" "Well, Mr. Nam lived near the Bongsung Marsh. I'm sure your father and mother know about him. He's quite famous, but his methods are somewhat peculiar." I nodded in agreement, signaling to continue, and Chutubin resumed his tale. Aunt Tu had to go all the way to the Bongsung Marsh to invite him over. On that day, he asked Aunt Tu to buy a pig's head and some miscellaneous offerings, then waited until nightfall to row out onto the river alone. He instructed Aunt Tu not to follow or approach the area. After a few hours, he returned, simply telling Aunt Tu, "Everything's fine, no need to worry," before calmly packing up his tools and leaving in the darkness. By the next morning, he was already up and about. After hearing Chutubin's story, Mr. Quat slapped his thigh loudly. Well, this Mr. Nam seems to have some dark secrets up his sleeve, eh, Chutu?" Seeing Mr. Quat's admiring expression, I nearly burst out laughing, but managed to stifle it. Mr. Nam probably has ascended to the heavens by now, offering incense to his ancestors. He wouldn't be sitting here reminiscing about the past with us, I remarked. Mr. Quack scratched his head, chuckled, and then lightly slapped the bamboo table. "Chutu, since you're in high spirits and Hao will be joining us soon, let's have a few drinks and share some spooky stories. If you're up for it, I'll call Aunt Hai to bring the wine and snacks. Today, it's my treat. Then, I'll share a strange story that I've experienced myself. How does that sound?" Seemingly waiting for this opportunity, Chutu grinned and turned to me. "What do you think, Hao?" I hesitated before replying. "Well, I don't drink much, so you and Mr. Quatch can drink while I enjoy the company. You rascal, a few glasses won't kill anyone. Besides, it's rare for Quatch to dig into his pocket to pay. And if you're worried about drinking too much and having to deal with an irate old man, just blame it on Chutu's persuasion. Mr. Quatch chimed in with a laugh. Chutu interjected playfully. Quatch, you're acting stingy. As for me, I still had some important matters to attend to the next day. But once Chutu had opened his mouth, it was hard to refuse. After a brief consideration, I agreed. Mr. Quatch hurried off to urge Aunt Hai to prepare the snacks and brought them out himself. The food and wine are ready. Now, let's hear Chutu's story, he announced eagerly. Mr. Quack Hao set the tone for our conversation about the supernatural. He poured a full glass of wine and handed it to Chutu. You go first, Chutu. Chutu was about to raise the glass to his lips when I intervened. Just a moment, Chutu. Can I borrow your glass for a bit? So you want to warm up your belly first, eh? Here, go ahead, Chutu replied, handing me the glass. I didn't say anything, just reached for the glass of wine, then stood up and went to Aunt Hai's stall to ask for a few incense sticks. Everyone looked puzzled as I lit the incense until the smoke filled the air. Then I proceeded to a small shrine under the banyan tree, lit 3 sticks there, and returned to my seat. I continued by placing 3 more incense sticks on the bamboo bench nearby, then raised my glass and muttered a prayer. On this full moon day, as the gates of the spiritual realm open wide, if any wandering souls are present, please join us for a sip of wine. Let us sit and share tales, but do not touch or tease. Remember, to the west, there's the earth deity. To the east, the white tiger. We offer this libation as an invitation to wandering souls. After the prayer, I poured the wine around the bench in an arc, then looked up to see everyone staring at me, with Mr. Quatch's face turning as green as plantain leaves. He stammered, How? What are you doing? Surely, you can't see real ghosts, can you? You haven't seen anything eerie floating around, have you? Please don't tease me. Chutu chimed in. What was that prayer you recited, Hao? Feeling flustered, I quickly waved my hand to explain. Oh no, it's not what you think. It's just that I've heard from elders that you should always be cautious with food and drink, whether living or dead. As for the prayer, I just recited it for tradition's sake. Please don't worry about it. Mr. Quatch breathed a sigh of relief. You devil, you almost scared me to death there. I thought you had some supernatural abilities. I even thought your ancestors were guiding you. I chuckled and poured another glass of wine for Chutu, who gulped it down in one go with a satisfying sigh. Mr. Quatch looked enviously at the empty glass, then grabbed the bottle and poured himself a full glass, which he quickly emptied as well. The intoxicating aroma of the wine mingled with the sweet scent of the incense, making me feel tipsy even before taking a sip. I silently laughed, thinking how many times in life would we, as family, gather like this to share stories? Oh well, might as well drink up. I raised my glass and drained it, then grimaced as if I had just bitten into a chili pepper. Chutu and Mr. Quatch burst into laughter, teasing me about being tipsy, but I didn't pay attention because I was feeling the warmth spreading from my throat to my stomach. The bitterness of the wine gradually faded away, leaving only a gentle sweetness of rice and a strong warmth of alcohol. My tongue tingled slightly. It had been a long time since I last drank, since the day I graduated and parted ways with my close friends from school. I looked up, raising my head to look at Chutu and Mr. Quatch, then let out a long ah, like a seasoned wine connoisseur. Both of them froze for a few seconds before bursting into laughter again. Chutu chuckled and said, "Only one glass and you're already drunk, my nephew." I rubbed my head and replied, "I told you I don't know how to drink." All right, let's get back to the late-night storytelling session, Chu said, turning to Mr. Quach. Quach, earlier you mentioned you wanted to share a ghost story. Now it's your turn to tell everyone. Mr. Quack nodded and began in a serious tone. Here's how the story goes. Oh, hold on. Let me have another sip of wine to calm my nerves. He took a gulp of wine, holding on to the glass tightly. His laughter subsided, and his eyes started to look distant and sorrowful. From what I could tell, this story must have happened to him personally. He sighed deeply and began to reminisce. Perhaps you won't believe it, but this story really happened, and I was the instigator of all the misfortune I'm about to tell you. I've always felt a deep regret and resentment towards it until now. Chute, you're probably familiar with my wife's cousin, right? After we got married, we were blessed with a son after a year. I was so happy. I even told my wife that when our son grows up, I'll teach him this and that, even though I'm not very educated. Mr. Quach chuckled softly before continuing. When the boy turned 3, I thought everything would go smoothly as I imagined, but then fate intervened. On that day, the head of Bin Village came to our house asking for my help with the fish harvest, and he also asked if I could lend him a plate for the newly caught fish. I hesitated because I disliked this man a lot. As you all know, he's known for being stingy and unpleasant. But because he promised high pay, I agreed. So he carried me on his bike across the muddy roads of the marshland, then had to carry the bike across several acres of fields to reach his house. This was also the first time I visited Mr. Bobbin's house. My initial impression of the house from a distance was quite elegant, but I still felt something strange and suffocating about it. He led me straight to the back of the house, his pregnant wife following along. When we reached the back, he pointed towards the fish pond and said, "There, buddy, I need your help. I've already set up the water pump over there. Your job is to pump out all the water and then drain the pond for me while I go to the market for a bit. I'll be back soon." I asked in surprise, "Why do I have to do this alone? Don't you have other helpers? Such a big pond, how can I manage it all by myself?" "Well, I did ask, but everyone's busy. You'll have to manage on your own." Before I could reply, he quickly turned and left. I could only grit my teeth and bear it. I knew he wasn't a good person, and now I realized that despite the high pay, he just wanted me to do everything. This was a 2-day job, and the compensation wasn't even worth it. I looked at the pond and sighed deeply. Trees grew densely around the edge of the pond. I'd have to clear them all before I could start. I grabbed the water pump and then took out my machete, spending half a day clearing the trees before the water in the pond finally drained. When I glanced into the pond, oh my! No fish were to be seen, only fish bones scattered across the pond. I wondered what had happened to the fish. Mr. Bobbin returned, looking as surprised as I was. He hurried over to me. "What happened to my fish, Quach?" "Why are you asking me?" "I was just about to ask you the same thing. Did you upset someone? Did they come here and poison your fish pond?" "I wouldn't. I'm a peaceful person. I've never harmed anyone. Besides, for the past few nights, I've heard the fish munching on their feed all night, even though they've been drugged. But today, they're all floating belly up. How strange." "Never mind. Do you plan to refill the pond? If not, then pay me for my work so I can leave." "Are you sure it's necessary?" he grumbled before turning away. I had no choice but to continue working. I rolled up my pants and waded into the pond, sinking deep into the mud, which emitted a strong, nauseating odor. It was probably the smell of dead fish. I grabbed a shovel and started scooping out mud, heaving it onto the bank. The sun was setting as I worked tirelessly, shoveling more mud until I heard a clunk. I froze and reached into the pile of muck and, would you believe it, what I pulled out was a human arm bone. I was so startled that I stumbled backward, my face drained of color. It took me a while to regain my composure, and when I finally mustered the courage to examine the bone again, I noticed something on it. I hesitantly reached out and discovered a beautiful golden bracelet buried in the mud. It turned out to be a woman. How did she end up dead here? I felt ashamed of myself for some reason. Anquach fell silent, pouring another glass of wine for me. He lowered his head and spoke solemnly. Instead of reporting to the police to uncover the truth, I let greed get the best of me. I took the bracelet and buried the arm back in the mud. I pretended like nothing had happened, collected my payment, and left. I hurried home to boast to my wife, planning to sell the bracelet to fix our dilapidated house. But my wife said, "Dear, isn't that dishonest? I've heard elders say that taking things from the dead brings them into our home." I felt guilty and tried to justify it, saying, "Our house is falling apart and our son needs to go to school soon. We don't have money for repairs." She insisted we keep it until absolutely necessary, rather than selling it hastily. After thinking for a while, I said, "All right, I'll listen to you." So my wife took the bracelet into the house and stored it away, while I continued with my daily chores. As evening fell, the air became oppressively hot. I returned home exhausted from a long day's work to find my son already asleep and my wife busying herself in the kitchen. Placing my tools on the shelf, I went to hug my wife from behind, intending to be affectionate, but as I touched her, I felt a sudden rush of cold air and caught a strange foul odor. I quickly released my wife, asking, "Are you sick? Why are you so cold?" She turned back with a smile and replied, "No, nothing's wrong. Look, isn't it beautiful?" As she spoke, she shook the bracelet on her wrist. Startled, I exclaimed, "Why are you wearing it?" "What's the matter? I'm just trying it on for a moment," she replied casually. I sternly demanded, "Take it off and put it away. It could cause trouble if someone sees it." "Fine, I'll put it away," she conceded. My wife lifted the bracelet and stored it, then went straight to bed without another word to me. After finishing my meal, I too retired for the night. In the middle of the night, I woke up to use the bathroom. I lit a small lamp in the room and squinted outside, looking for a secluded spot to clear my mind. Everything was blurry in the dark, blending into the sound of the wind rustling through the coconut leaves. Suddenly, I heard a distinct splashing sound coming from behind the house, seemingly from the floor of our house. It was odd. Could my wife be taking a bath? But it was past midnight. Why would she bathe now? I rushed into the house to light another lamp and cautiously ventured outside with it. The golden light slowly illuminated everything, and to my relief, I discovered that it was indeed my wife, bathing with her back turned toward me. I chuckled and joked, "Hey, make sure to scrub yourself clean. I smelled something fishy on our son earlier this evening. Hurry up and come inside before you catch a cold." Afterward, I turned back into the house, placed the lamp on the kitchen shelf towards the back, intending to fetch a towel for my wife. Suddenly, arms wrapped around me from behind, and I chuckled, knowing it was men. "What? Feeling cold already?" I teased. Men didn't respond. As I reached down to hold her hand, I jerked back in surprise to find my wife also wearing the same bracelet. I was about to turn and scold her, but when I glanced up at the wall beneath the tube light, my shadow cast on the wall. But the horrifying part was my wife's shadow embracing me from behind was nowhere to be seen on the wall. My legs started trembling, and I began to sway unsteadily. So who was the one embracing me then? The putrid smell returned, and I mustered all my strength to push away the arm around me. When I turned to look, I stumbled to the ground, reeling like a child. In front of me was a figure resembling men, with half of its face twisted in a grimace, and the lower jaw almost falling off, dangling loosely on its face, accompanied by a few maggots wriggling on the rotten flesh. It grinned slightly, its lifeless eyes staring at me as it slowly advanced towards me, the sound of the wind outside growing louder and louder. Then, with a pop, the lamp went out, leaving a thick, suffocating darkness. Then, with another pop, the light returned, but this time its repulsive face was inches away from mine. Laughing in the darkness, I screamed in horror and ran towards the room, but as I reached the door, Men's shadow emerged from inside, causing me to stumble again, my face pale with fear. My wife, holding the lamp, looked bewildered and exclaimed, "What happened? Why did you scream so suddenly in the middle of the night? It's enough to startle anyone." I hesitated, slowly standing up. "Is it really you?" "What are you saying?" "Of course it's me," she replied. Trembling, I reached out to touch Men's chin, confirming that it was indeed her. At that moment, I stammered, interrupting Anquak, "Is this some kind of spiritual possession? This is truly dangerous." Chute patted my shoulder, asking, "What's going on, How?" "Oh, it's nothing, Uncle," I replied. "Anquach, please continue." Anquach continued. I quickly grabbed my wife's hand and pulled her straight into the room, slamming the door shut. After catching my breath, I asked her, "Where's the bracelet? Where is it?" "Well, it's in the wardrobe. Where else? I told you I put it away." "Give it to me. I have to go to the district market and sell it right away." "Are you crazy? It's late now. Who would open the door for me to sell it? What happened anyway?" I didn't answer, trying to calm myself down. "Tomorrow morning, I'll sell it. I can't keep it. Can you tell me what's going on?" "There's nothing. Just come to bed." "All right, I'll go to bed early then. I have work tomorrow." After saying that, Men returned to bed to sleep, but I couldn't sleep at all. I lit a cigarette and sat at the head of the bed, my eyes always fixed on my wife, occasionally glancing towards the wardrobe where that sinister object was kept, until the rooster crowed in the morning. Men woke up and saw me preparing to change clothes. "Where are you going?" she asked. "To the district market." "What about helping Aunt High with the field work? If you don't go, she'll come over and curse us." I paused, contemplating her words. My wife continued, "All right then, I'll go in the morning and be back by noon. It's not too late to go then." "Okay, you can go in the morning, but promise me you won't take that thing out of the house, understood?" "I know, don't worry. Just go to work." With that settled, I headed out for work. I carried the hoe to the field, but fear gnawed at my heart, and what I feared came true. That morning, my wife stayed solemnly on the porch while our youngest played inside. Suddenly, he rushed out to tell Men, "Mommy, I have a friend to play with." My wife seemed puzzled. Our house stood solitary in the fields. Where could a child come from to play with him? "Who are you talking about playing with you?" she asked. "The lady in our house," he replied, pointing inside. My wife strained her eyes but saw no one. "There's no one in the house," she insisted. "Yes, there is, Mommy. She's standing at the door, smiling." My wife began to feel uneasy. "All right, play in the yard. Don't go inside. Wait for your dad to come home." The little one reluctantly moved to the fishing net laid out in the yard to play alone. Men felt somewhat relieved and resumed her tasks. Later, when she didn't hear our youngest, she turned to look and saw him kneeling, his head stuck into the mouth of the fishing net, swaying back and forth. "Lee, what foolish game is this? Come here this instant," she scolded. He didn't respond. My wife, furious, grabbed a cane to discipline him, but as she lifted the net, he collapsed to the ground, eyes red, tongue protruding, body limp. My wife, trembling, sank to the ground, clutching him, screaming for help. Men wailed until she was hoarse, but the boy lay lifeless. At this point, Anquak choked back tears, and both Chute and I were deeply moved by his tragedy. He wiped his tears and continued, "Just then, I returned home and saw men holding the lifeless body. I knew something terrible had happened, so I hurled the hoe aside and rushed to my wife, asking, "What happened to Lee?" Men crying louder, choked out. "He's dead, dear." "Why? Why did he die?" My wife shook her head, then continued to cry bitterly. I joined in, holding Lee's lifeless body, my heart burning with agony. I noticed a familiar red pattern on his neck, resembling the design on that cursed bracelet. Suddenly, rage consumed me, and I shouted, "Was it you?" I leaped up and dashed into the house, grabbing a hammer and pulling the malevolent object from the closet, hurling it to the ground. Then, I swung the hammer furiously, pounding into it until the bracelet sank into the earth, the hammer's marks searing into its surface. I yelled, "You killed my son! Are you satisfied?" I bent down to pick up the sinister object, intending to smash it further, but to my surprise, it remained unscathed, not a scratch on it. I screamed, "I'm not afraid of you." I ran to the riverbank, flinging it into the rushing water, then returned to my wife. That day, I performed the rites for Lee's soul, burying him behind our house with a small Quatch emblem. My wife mourned and struggled for days, alternating between madness and lucidity. She'd speak to herself and laugh senselessly, while I had nightmares every night, seeing visions of a woman with a child, hearing whispers of, "It's your own doing," and echoing laughter. I couldn't sleep well for a whole month. One morning, Anhien came over, inviting me to work with him. I reluctantly put on my coat as he sipped his tea and said, "Quatch, have you heard? Ba Bing's wife had a miscarriage." "What?" I looked up at Anhien in surprise. "How did she miscarry?" "I heard from the folks down the market that Ba Bing's wife got scared by a ghost. They say she went out behind the house to relieve herself at midnight, saw a white figure crawling up from the ground, got frightened, stumbled, and had a miscarriage." "And then what on?" "Calm down, let me tell you. Ba Bing asked someone to find a medium to catch the ghost. Heard there's a skilled master coming today." Upon hearing this, I had an idea. I urged Anhien to go to work first. I rushed over to Ba Bing's house. By the time I arrived, my shirt was soaked with sweat, and I breathed heavily. I went inside. As soon as I entered the gate, I saw an old man about 70 years old, calmly sitting and drinking tea in the front yard. I approached slowly. Before I could even greet him, he said, "Gray roads, silent paths. It seems you're facing something you shouldn't be, right?" "Yes, that's right, sir. I'm here hoping you can help me." The old man took another sip of tea, pondered for a moment, then Ba Bing came out to the yard. He seemed respectful. "Master, everything is ready." After speaking, he turned to me. "Quatch, what are you doing here?" Before I could answer, the old man stood up and went inside. A moment later, he came out with a sharp hammer in his hand. Without saying a word, he walked to a large bamboo root right in front of Ba Bing's house and began to chop vigorously. In a short time, the bamboo was felled, to my and Ba Bing's astonishment. He then approached the table where he had poured a cup of tea earlier, calmly lit a cigarette. Ba Bing exclaimed, "Master, why did you cut down my bamboo tree? My father planted it himself when he was alive." The old man calmly took a drag of his cigarette and replied, "Do you know that your house is surrounded by negative energies in feng shui? There are still many things I will explain to you slowly. Can you tell me if this house was built by your father or with the help of others?" Ba Bing hesitated. "Yes, I asked a feng shui master to build it for me. I don't know if your family has any grudges against that feng shui master, but everything built here is unfavorable for the homeowner. Minor misfortune includes illnesses, while severe ones can lead to casualties for future generations. The negative energies here have violated the 5 types of negative influences in feng shui: visible harm, light harm, energy harm, sound harm, and wind harm. Visible harm refers to the tangible harm of objects that can be seen. I'll explain two things to you first. Do you know why I cut down the tree? No, I don't. Because there's a large tree in front of your main door called a gate guard, violating feng shui taboos, making the homeowner susceptible to illnesses. That's why I took action to chop it down. Secondly, also regarding the main door, there's a major straight road leading directly to it, which is the embankment road in front of your house. It's called conflict road, and the larger the road, the higher the negative energy. This direction is also very dangerous. Now look, the trees on your land block out all the sunlight, causing a decrease in positive energy and an increase in negative energy. Furthermore, please come inside the house with me. After speaking, the old man and Ba Bin hurried into the house, and I followed along. Inside, he pointed to the front door and then turned to the back door. Look, your house has a front door facing the back door. The energy flow enters and disperses without gathering. This is called transverse road harm. Now look up at the ceiling. The main beam of the house goes straight through the middle of the large door without deviation. This is called transverse heart harm. Have you been experiencing insomnia and constant anxiety? Ba Bin's father nodded hesitantly. There's more. Can I take a look inside your room, sir? Yes, of course. Feel free. He confidently walked into the room, then approached the window at the head of Ba Bin's bed, looked out towards the side of the house for a while, then turned around and asked, "Can you tell me whose grave is outside?" "That's my father's grave." "So what year was he born?" 1910. "And what about you?" "Yes, 1940. The old man murmured to himself and then sighed. "Honestly, your survival until now is truly miraculous." Ba Bin was startled. "Master, what do you mean by that? Did that feng shui master also advise you to build your father's grave horizontally with his feet facing towards the house?" "Yes, that's right, master. He said that by doing so, our descendants would receive blessings from our ancestors." The old man shook his head with disdain. "Your father's grave faces northeast, with his feet pointing southwest, right at the head of your bed. Your father was born in the Can-Tut year, with a metal fate falling into the heavenly palace. And you were born in the Can-Thin year, with a fire fate falling into the earthly palace. Metal and fire clash directly, and the annual star is the 5 ghosts, which shines directly at the head of your bed. Disaster is certain to befall the eldest son, which is you. Truly sinister." After hearing this, Ba Bin's complexion visibly changed. Cold sweat drenched his forehead, and he began to plead desperately for the old man's help. "Master, is there any way to save me? I don't want to die, master." "I haven't finished speaking, so don't cry just yet. There's something even more frightening. Stand up and follow me to the back of the graveyard." So everyone followed each other to the back of Ba Bin's house. It was only then that the old man started to hint at the situation to Ba Bin. He turned to Ba Bin and said, "Hey you, take a shovel and go to the 4 corners of the graveyard. Measure 3 handspans down from the surface and then dig in to retrieve those things for me." Hearing this, Ba Bin's face turned pale, and he hesitantly asked, "Retrieve what, sir?" At that moment, for some reason, Ba Bin obediently followed the instructions of the feng shui master. Perhaps because when facing him, he felt a strong sense of trust that the old man could help him. At that moment, I hurriedly ran into Ba Bin's warehouse to grab a short shovel, then dashed straight to the graveyard without much hesitation. Following the instructions of the old man, I measured 3 handspans down at each corner of the grave and dug deep. Do you know what I found? 4 small jars about the size of a fist. Each jar had 2 intersecting threads around it. At that time, I didn't know what it was, so I quickly brought it to the old man. He examined the jars and then turned to Bobbin, saying, "Fortunately for you, someone has intervened and used magic to suppress this ghost. Otherwise, you would have long returned to your ancestors." What did the master just say? What ghost? Where is it? Bobbin asked in confusion, looking around nervously, while the old man remained calm and replied, "It has been on your property for a long time, but it couldn't harm anyone because someone used a spell to subdue it under this graveyard. But I don't understand why it has now escaped and harmed people." The old man gestured towards the graveyard, and Bobbin grew increasingly frightened. I saw the old man's hands trembling. Bobbin grabbed the old man's hand and pleaded, "Master, please help me get rid of that ghost. I will pay you whatever you ask for." The old man gave Bobbin a sharp look and said, "For every action, there is a consequence. I am certain that I must catch the ghost. As for money, I will only take a small amount to buy tools for my trade. If you truly have a heart, use that money to help the poor and actively participate in temple pilgrimages to accumulate merit for yourself." "Yes, I will follow your advice completely. What should I do now, master?" "Have you purchased all the items I instructed you to buy?" "I have not missed a single item." "All right then. First, hang a unicorn stepping on a mysterious plate on the main beam of your house to reduce negative energy. Hang another convex mirror with mysterious plates at the main entrance. Then, have someone move the back door slightly to the side to avoid the line of negative energy. Additionally, you should cut down some trees around the house to allow positive energy to flow in. As for your father's grave, I will choose a favorable date and time to re-enter him." "Thank you, master. I will get to work right away." Bobbin expressed his gratitude, intending to rush off to prepare, but the old man stopped him. "Hold on, there's no rush. Sit down here. I have something to ask you." Bobbin quickly picked up a stool and invited the old man to sit down. "Now, please tell me the truth," he urged. "What truth, master?" Bobbin seemed puzzled by the statement, prompting the old man to continue. "The truth about the body buried beneath that grave." At this point, Bobbin's face began to change color. What body? There's no body buried under my graveyard," he stammered. "All right then, if you don't want to talk about it, that's fine. I won't force you. But I'm not sure if your life will be spared in the future," the old man said, preparing to leave. After saying that, the old man stood up to leave, but Bobbin stopped him. "Wait, master. Please sit down and let me explain everything. Actually, this might be the sin caused by my grandfather." Bobbin hesitated for a moment, then sighed and continued. "This happened when I was very young. I only heard my mother tell the story later. At that time, our house was still a simple classical tiled house. Once, my father went to buy rice by boat along the marshy riverbanks and met a young girl. This girl fell in love with my father, and they lived together, but I heard that she already had a husband. Later, my father returned home. After a while, the girl came to our house, claiming to be pregnant with my father's child. However, my grandfather was determined not to accept her because, at that time, he was a man of social status, and if this matter was exposed, it would greatly affect his reputation. Moreover, my mother would definitely not overlook this matter. The girl cried a lot and left in the stormy night. The next morning, when my father opened the back door of the house, he found the girl's body hanging from a tree branch, wearing a red dress with a pair of grave pots. So what did they do with that body? Yet, I haven't heard them mention this either. I only know that after that period, my mother fell sick constantly, having nightmares every night, and so did I. Strange phenomena often occurred in the house at night, such as hearing eerie cries echoing around the house, and the cooked rice smelled like rotten mud within an hour. While my father was troubled by these events, a man claiming to be a feng shui master came to our house. He said that our house had bad feng shui, which caused continuous illness and misfortune for the occupants. The man suggested rebuilding the house according to proper feng shui principles to change our luck, and my father quickly agreed. So, the house was rebuilt. Before the feng shui master left, he instructed that when my father passed away, we must build a grave exactly like the one everyone sees now. When he left, everything seemed to have been resolved. However, my mother's illness worsened, and the bizarre occurrences in the house continued. Eventually, my father invited another Taoist master to our home. The two of them went to the back of the house, and despite our attempts, they didn't allow anyone to follow them. After a while, the Taoist master bid farewell to my father and left. Indeed, everything came peaceful afterward, and since then, my father has never allowed anyone to disturb the grave, not even future generations. After hearing the story, the old man nodded and said, "Now I understand. If I'm not mistaken, your father, fearing the repercussions on his career and status due to the girl's disappearance, along with your mother, conspired to bury the truth under that grave. Because of the heavy grudge, the girl's spirit forgot to move on, haunting your family every night, intending to harm your family until they were left with nothing. As for that feng shui master, I suspect he was sent by the girl's husband or family to seek revenge on your family for her. Wait, if her family wanted revenge, why didn't they report my father to the authorities? Why resort to such tactics?" The old man chuckled softly, saying, "If they reported to the authorities, only your father would have been arrested. By engaging a feng shui master, they aim to ensure that not only your father, but also the future generations of your family would gradually decline and fail to prosper. That's where the malice lies. So that's how it is. And I was foolish enough to listen to that feng shui master and build my father's grave right on the adverse position. I've brought this upon myself. Your father probably recognized the disturbance caused by that female spirit, which is why he later invited the master to suppress it. That's how he escaped the calamity. But I still have one question unanswered. Why did you lift that grave despite your father's warning not to touch it?" Well, the truth is, it was my greed. Some time ago, I heard the commotion from the fish under the grave every night, and I thought those fish must have grown quite large by now. I figured they'd fetch a good price if sold, so I couldn't resist and forgot my father's warning. Greedy hearts lead to foolish actions. The curse your father brought upon himself is now yours to bear." Interrupting the elder, the son interjected, "I wish the curse would only fall upon me, but now it's taken my son's life. The grudge of this female spirit is quite heavy. It won't cease until it has relieved the bitterness in its heart. There's one illogical aspect that I've been pondering over. Even if this grave were reburied, those 4 jars of talismans would still be there. So why did the female spirit manage to escape?" The son began to intervene in their conversation. "I think I inadvertently helped that spirit escape." As he spoke, he felt an overwhelming sense of guilt and regret. Surprised by his revelation, both men turned to him, and Babin hastily added, "I remember now, Master. That day, I asked Quach to come over and reposition the grave. Could it be because of that the female spirit was able to escape?" The old man looked at the son intently before lowering his voice. "From the beginning, I sensed something amiss about this young man. Now, tell me the whole story from start to finish." "Yes, well, the truth is, I never expected you to be as greedy as I was. Your greed has cost the lives of 2 innocent souls." Enough blaming each other now. Everything is faded. It's clear now that the female spirit entered that gold ring and used the life force of your friend to escape. "Oh no, The old man suddenly stood up, his face serious, and turned to the son. "Did you throw that ring into the river beside the house?" "Yes, I did." "Is there anyone else at your house?" "Yes, my wife and child. But she's been acting strange, so I couldn't bring her along." "This is serious. You need to take me there now. Hurry." "What exactly happened, sir?" "No time to explain. We need to get to your house right away. I'll explain on the way." So, the son and the two men hurried off. By then, it was getting dark. On the way, the old man explained, the female spirit died in despair, buried beneath the ground by the person she loved. Of course, she will resent water. Now that you've thrown her into the river beside your house, think about the consequences. You also left your wife at home alone. Let's hope her fate isn't cut short. Hearing this, the son became extremely worried. The journey back home was long, and his wife was alone. He was in and out of consciousness. After a frantic journey, they finally reached his home. Standing in front of the door, they felt something was wrong. The house, usually bustling with the sounds of nature, was eerily quiet. The usual chirping of crickets was absent, and the oil lamp inside cast a dark shadow. His wife was nowhere to be seen. If it were any other day, she would have been screaming by now. Without further hesitation, the son moved to enter the house, but the old man stopped him. "You don't need to search. Your wife isn't in the house. Quickly, light a big torch for me." The son followed the old man's instructions, lighting a large torch. Instead of entering the house, the old man went straight to the riverbank where the son had thrown the ring. "Quickly, light 3 incense sticks for me. Prepare rice, salt, 2 bowls of water, 3 cups of wine, 2 candlesticks, and a meal." "Does your house still have gold?" "Yes, there's still some left from the last offering." "Bring it all here." After gathering everything, the old man arranged them by the riverbank. It looked like a ritual for the 7th lunar month. He reached into a bag he carried, took out 2 large nails and a roll of red thread. He tied the red thread to the heads of the 2 nails, then took 7 steps to the left side of the altar and firmly planted 1 nail into the opposite bank of the river. He did the same on the right side, creating 2 symmetrical lines of red thread. Once everything was set up, the old man turned to the son. "Write your wife's birth date and birth month on this large silver coin, then tie it to one end of the red thread. Throw it into the river, and tie the other end of the red thread to your left middle finger. Kneel in the middle and call out your wife's name from the bottom of your heart." "What happened to my wife, sir?" The old man sighed. "Your wife can no longer be saved. We can only search for her body. Last time, the female spirit only took her soul, leaving her in a half-conscious state. But this time," the old man sighed again. Upon hearing this, the son burst into tears of despair. "My dear wife, I've doomed myself. Don't cry anymore. This time, I'll use soul-summoning magic to find her body. Her soul is lost, and if we don't find her body before midnight, she'll be lost forever. So focus on praying." Suppressing his grief, the son focused on praying, hoping to find his wife. The old man began chanting a spell, which lasted a long time. He then used 2 figurines to dip into the wine before tossing them into the river. Babin stood silently beside him, watching intently. A few minutes later, the water in the area where the red thread was boiled fiercely, bubbling up more and more intensely. The old man chanted faster than before, and slowly the body of the son's wife emerged from the riverbed. Her body was bruised, blood streaming from her mouth, and her eyes devoid of life. Overwhelmed with grief, the son rushed into the river to retrieve his wife's body, crying uncontrollably. The old man shouted loudly, "Bring the body up quickly!" Continuing his incantation, the old man retrieved the body. As the son lifted his wife's body from the water, the ring also floated up from the river. Swiftly, the old man tied a charm to the ring with a thread and snatched it up. Holding the ring, he continued chanting and broke the heads of 3 incense sticks, throwing them into a small jar along with the ring. He sealed the jar tightly with a talisman from his pocket, then tied it with a thread. "Everything is fine now," the old man said with a sigh of regret. "Has it been captured, sir?" Babin asked timidly. "Yes, I will take it to my place for repentance, hoping for its early salvation," the old man replied. Despite the discussions around him, the son still held his wife's body, crying in agony. The old man comforted him by patting his shoulder. "Life and death are predestined. Don't be sad. According to what I see, your future fortune will be prosperous and wealthy as long as you accumulate virtue." Wiping away his tears, the son thanked the old man for finding his wife's body. It was then that he noticed a scar on the old man's hand in the shape of a crescent moon. Hearing this, Uncle Tu quickly intervened. "Is there a scar in the shape of a crescent moon? Is he the one who tied the hairknot on his head, thin and gaunt but with piercing eyes, a transcendent demeanor that gives chills just by looking?" "Yes, that's him, Uncle Tu. He's a famous fortune teller, it turns out. But I never knew until now. He never mentioned his name from the beginning until he left." "He's indeed a mysterious figure," Uncle Tu confirmed, recalling his wife's description of the man. "He's truly mysterious," Babin added. Uncle Tu seemed to admire him, taking a sip of wine before saying, "This master truly is an extraordinary person, helping others without expecting anything in return." After he finished speaking, he sighed and continued, "I deeply regret what happened to your wife, but it's all in the past now, so don't be sad anymore." "Yes, Uncle Tu, it's been a few years already, so I'm fine," the son replied. Mr. Quach poured more wine, and we continued drinking, going from one glass to another. Our voices echoed in the dark night, gradually fading away. The next morning, the sun was shining brightly. I got up from bed, my head pounding like a hammer. I suddenly remembered that I had an important task to do today, so I hurried to brush my teeth and wash my face. Then I heard Uncle Tu and Mr. Quach calling from outside the house. "How? Are you awake yet?" Both of my parents were absent, so I stepped out onto the porch. "What's up, Uncle Tu? Are you looking for my dad and brothers?" "They probably went up to the village," I replied. "Oh, Uncle and Quach went to look for them. We were supposed to meet last night for a drink, but they seem to have forgotten," Uncle Tu explained. I genuinely couldn't remember what I had arranged with them, as I had drunk quite a bit last night. So I asked Uncle Tu to confirm what we had planned. "Uncle Tu, I apologize. I drank too much last night, so I don't remember anything. Could you please clarify?" I said. "Uncle Tu, you're quite the benefactor. It was only after last night's drinking session that I found out you're a true friend," Mr. Quach chimed in. As I was still bewildered, Uncle Tu continued. "Last night, you were drunk and spilled all the beans to me and Quach. It turns out you're a disciple of the famous fortune teller. Yet, you've been hiding it from me all this time. I'm really angry with you." Feeling embarrassed and at a loss for words, I was about to speak when Uncle Tu went on. "Last night, you mentioned that the important task to deal with today is to catch the bridgehead ghost, or the skin ghost, because it often sits on the bridgehead every night, in the upper village. You also promised that Uncle and Quach could join in this task. You gave us instructions, so Uncle and Quach, get ready. Your life has never involved ghost catching before, so if you go back on your word, don't ever look me in the eye again." At that moment, I was horrified and muttered to myself, "Oh no, it's true that alcohol loosens the tongue, and now I've said things I shouldn't have." "Is there anything else you want to add, How?" Uncle Tu asked. "You've been talking a lot, so I guess you were too drunk and forgot." Let me tell you the whole story again, he continued. My full name is Nguyen Hao, and I'm 23 years old. I'm a senior biology student. My family often calls me the stubborn one because I've never been afraid of anything and don't believe in ghosts or deities. Whenever someone mentions something I find unreasonable, I'll do everything to prove them wrong. However, my family believes in fate and karma, from my grandparents to my aunts, uncles, and even my mother. Many times, I've seen my mother standing in front of the ancestral altar mumbling prayers. So I once blurted out, "Mom, our ancestors have been dead for hundreds of years. Do you really think they can hear your prayers?" That earned me a scolding. I live with my parents and my 8-year-old sister in a small house at the end of the street. Next to our house is my grandparents' 3-room ancestral home. Although it's quite old, they never want to change its architecture or build a new house. I often wondered why my grandparents insisted on preserving the old house, and my grandfather explained that keeping it that way would bring prosperity and luck to future generations. The house, which had been preserved by our ancestors for many years, still stood strong, and its prosperity continued to grow. It was considered an indestructible ancestral home. That's why I understood why my grandparents meticulously cleaned from the ancestral altar to the kitchen every day, with incense smoke lingering month after month. My nature led me to doubt such beliefs, and I often thought about advising my grandparents to build a new house for a more comfortable life. However, I realized that their only comfort was this ancestral home. If something were to happen to me, my grandparents would be devastated, and they had my youngest aunt to take care of them. So I couldn't bear to make them worry. In a few days, it would be the anniversary of my late grandmother's passing, so I took the opportunity to invite my friends to my house for a few days. Excited at the prospect of going out, each of my friends eagerly agreed. Therefore, in the afternoon, we arranged to drive from the city back to my hometown. On the way, my friend Long, who never seemed to run out of things to say, was constantly chatting. He asked about everything under the sun, even how many eggs my house's chicken laid. Despite being a bit annoying, he was a kind-hearted guy. Sitting behind Long was Fuang, a spirited girl who could match Long's energy. They could be described as each other's nemesis, always bickering and bantering. There were moments when Long would jokingly say, "If there's Long, why is there Fuang?" Despite their constant arguments, they couldn't be separated. It was as if they were intertwined in an unbreakable bond. Driving ahead of us was Tung Duong, the quietest one in the group. He always wore round glasses that gave him an air of intellectualism. Indeed, he was a genuine bookworm, capable of memorizing thousands of lines of poetry from The Tale of Kyo in one night. Political science textbooks were like child's play to him. He could grasp anything with just one read. His mind was always in the clouds, lost in thought. Lastly, sitting behind me was Jia Han, a smart, beautiful, kind, and talented girl. You could say I had a crush on her, but it was just in my thoughts. Despite spending 4 years together, I had never let Han know about my feelings. Long knew about my crush on Han, so I had warned him not to tell anyone. He scolded me for days, saying, "If you like someone but don't speak up, how will they know? Are you planning to ferment your feelings? Are you even a man?" Ignoring his words, I knew what I was doing. This time, Han's boyfriend didn't accompany her. As our car turned onto the narrow road leading to my house, the sky began to darken. As we delved deeper, the road became rougher, so Tung Duong drove ahead because his headlights were the brightest. Long followed, and I trailed behind. The wind was strong tonight, causing the coconut trees along the road to rustle their leaves, sounding like whispers in the dark. At one point, Long felt a chill down his spine and slowed down to tell me, Hey, Hao. This road to your house is giving me the creeps, man. Could we run into something weird? After saying that, Long shivered, and a branch from a tree hit him on the head, causing him noticeable pain. You know I'm scared of ghosts, Long. Why do you have to scare me like that? I retorted, laughing with Han to ease his nerves. This road, I've traveled it at night countless times, and I've never seen anything strange. Besides, there's no such thing as ghosts in this world. Hearing this, Long nodded hesitantly, saying, I hope so, but I still feel uneasy. Hey, where did Duong run off to? He probably went ahead. Let's catch up to him quickly before he gets lost. After urging Long to chase after Duong, we finally caught up with him, although he was still about 100 meters ahead. Suddenly, Long's face turned pale and he stammered, Hey, I think there's someone in white sitting behind Duong's car. Can you see it? Hearing this, Han, Phuong, and I strained our eyes to see if it was true. However, the darkness of the night and the dense trees lining the road made it difficult to see clearly. Before we could confirm anything, Duong's car turned into a curve and disappeared from view. I didn't have a chance to call him back, as that road didn't lead to my house. It was the path to the village cemetery. We followed and found Duong sitting on an old limestone tomb nearby, his car a short distance away, its engine still running. Surrounding us were graves, but not a single soul was in sight. We hurried to Duong's side, and Han quickly pressed her thumb under his nose. He gradually regained consciousness. Are you okay? What happened? Why did you run in here? Han asked, concerned. I'm fine, just a little dizzy. I felt tired while driving, and my head was spinning. I don't know why I drove in here, to be honest. As he finished speaking, he rubbed his head and Long asked again, Who were you driving towards just now? I didn't drive anyone, I swear. Are you sure you didn't give anyone a lift? No. Oh my, could it be? Long exclaimed, rushing forward, which startled Phuong too. She grabbed Long's hand tightly and squeezed it. Stop scaring me. This place is too creepy. Let's hurry back, guys, Long urged, visibly shaken. I had to reassure both of them. Don't listen to Long's nonsense. Maybe he saw something by mistake earlier. I didn't see anyone, and there's no such thing as ghosts. It's ridiculous. Han supported my statement. Hao's right. I didn't see anything either, but I really saw it. Believe me. Long persisted while Phuong urged us to leave. Let's just get out of here. I don't want to stay a minute longer. Okay, let's go back. Duong, can you still drive? I'll take over for you. I offered. Yeah, I'm fine now. As I glanced at Long, I noticed he was frozen in place, mouth agape, seemingly trying to say something. I prodded him. It's getting foggy. Let's go. You planning on staying here until morning? Suddenly, he grabbed Phuong's hand and sprinted off without looking back. We hurried after him, leaving the eerie silence of the cemetery behind, with only the distant croak of frogs echoing through the bushes. When I looked back, all I could see were faint white dots from the distant tombs. Finally, we made it back home. My parents were waiting in the yard near the willow tree, and even my grandparents rushed out to greet us. Despite her silvery hair, my grandmother was still quite strong. She patted my head and said, Hey, why are you coming home so late, kid? You're making these old folks worry sick. I chuckled and hugged my grandmother, saying, Don't worry, Grandma. I'm back safe and sound. I've told you countless times not to come home late, especially on deserted roads like the ones around here. It's too easy to run into trouble. Grandma, I've told you many times, there aren't as many ghosts in this world as you think. Science has proven that ghosts and demons are just figments of human imagination. If you don't listen to me, you won't see my face again. I know, Grandma. I'll listen. Oh, and does the talisman I gave you still have it on you? I pursed my lips and pulled out the red string with the talisman attached to it from my collar to show her. Seeing that I still carried the talisman she gave me 10 years ago, my grandmother nodded approvingly. "It looks like you still listen to this old lady. That's a protective talisman. Always remember to carry it with you to ward off evil spirits." "Grandma, I've been safe, haven't I?" But my friend wasn't so lucky. Just now, they fell off the bike at the cemetery. Luckily, it was just a minor scratch. Hearing this, my grandfather spoke up. "Heavens above, are you planning to scold our grandson out here forever and not let him and his friends come inside to rest and clean up?" With that said, he walked over to where Duong was standing. "Give me your hand, let me see." He quickly held up his injured hand. My grandfather examined it closely and noticed something milky white around the wound. After a few seconds of contemplation, he sighed. "All right, kids, come inside. I have something to ask you." Upon hearing that, we immediately went inside. As soon as we entered, Long didn't say anything and jumped straight onto the wooden horse, pulling the blanket over himself tightly. I could tell he was quite frightened. Everyone gathered around the table in the main room, and my father urged my mother to brew a pot of hot tea. Under the dim, circular light on the ceiling, my grandfather, with a solemn expression, took a drag from his cigarette, the ember glowing red. Then he slowly walked towards the ancestral altar and lit a large incense stick. Turning back to us, he said, "Come here, light some incense." After we lit the incense, my grandfather sat down and spoke in a solemn tone. "What happened to you kids on the way back?" We recounted the entire story to him, and after listening, his face became even more pensive. He said, "Do you kids know what you've encountered?" Jiahan quickly asked, "What is it, Grandpa?" "An ill-fated encounter." Upon hearing this, everyone exchanged worried glances. Long then threw the blanket aside and squeezed into the middle of the group, saying urgently, "Grandpa, I've already told them, but they don't believe me. I really saw it." I looked at Long and burst out laughing. "You're just being overly imaginative, you scaredy cat. Believe what you want, but I still believe I saw it clearly, twice." "Twice?" "Han, didn't Long only mention seeing a figure in white sitting behind Duong's bike?" Han was puzzled. "The second time was at the cemetery. When we were about to get into the car, Long glanced towards the big tamarind tree amidst the graves and saw it clearly. A girl in a white dress with flowing hair covering her face, waving her hand in our direction. I was so scared I almost wet my pants." After speaking, he took a sip of hot tea and finished it all in one go. I knew Long's knack for mischief making. He was probably just concocting another scary story to spook everyone. I patted his shoulder and said, "You go inside, take a bath, and rest. Stop scaring others with ghosts and demons. No one in the group saw anything. It's all your imagination, just poorly executed." "Seriously, I'm not making this up." My grandfather interjected, "I don't think Long is lying. Do you kids know what that white powder on Duong's hand is?" Fuang spread a bit on her finger and examined it, then said, "It's probably lime powder from the grave sticking to his hand when Duong fell off the bike." My grandfather shook his head. "No, that's bone ash." Hearing this, Fuang exclaimed and quickly washed off the substance on her hand with tea water. When you all returned, I noticed Duong's complexion was pale, and there was a black mark on his temple. I knew something was amiss, my grandfather said, further reinforcing his point. His words seemed unbelievable to me. Although I knew my grandfather had always believed in supernatural phenomena, I decided to refute. Clearly, that's lime powder from the grave, not bone ash. If you keep spouting nonsense like this, how will our friends dare to come here and play in the future? I'm only speaking the truth. This is indeed bone ash. Those afflicted with ill-fated encounters often experience this. Firstly, the wandering soul leads the afflicted to visit their home. This home can be where they died or where they're buried. They leave a bit of their bone ash on the unfortunate person, who then can't escape from them no matter where they go. Next, the wandering soul tries to bring this person down to live with them. Usually, these wandering souls either can't or don't want to reincarnate. So they become malevolent earthbound spirits, harboring intense resentment. If those afflicted with ill-fated encounters don't realize it in time, they may lose their lives. Jiahan seemed uneasy. So it means Duong has encountered ill-fated encounters. And the girl Long saw is the ghost that follows Duong. That also implies that the grave Duong crashed into is the girl's home. It could be, my grandfather said softly. Now, can you tell me where that grave is located in the cemetery? Jiahan thought for a moment before replying. It's a few graves down the dirt road, next to the old lime-covered grave. There seem to be 2 trees planted in front of it, but it's too dark to see clearly, especially since the grave doesn't have any name or inscription. Han is correct, Fuang agreed. Upon hearing this, Duong turned to look at Han, pushed his glasses up his nose in confusion, and said, "What are you all talking about? That grave clearly has a name. It says Huang Tiyan, born in 1950, died on July 30th, 1967. Upon hearing Duong's words, we all looked at each other in astonishment. Clearly, none of us saw any inscription on the grave. There were only a few pieces of flaking lime. Suddenly, a chilling gust of wind blew in from outside, making everyone shiver. My grandfather seemed to recall something and said, "So it's her. According to what I know, the girl you encountered was raped and murdered by a gang several decades ago. They even decapitated her when she was just a lifeless body. She was only 17 at the time. It seems only those with ill-fated encounters can see what should not be seen." Long interjected again. "If that's the case, then I also saw the female ghost. Does that mean I'm also afflicted?" "Not necessarily," my grandfather explained, "because the human body is divided into 3 souls and 7 vital spirits, symbolizing the yin-yang and vital energy. If the 3 souls outweigh the 7 vital spirits, the person is more likely to encounter supernatural entities than the average person. So I can feel more at ease now. You kids shouldn't be too careless either. It's best not to go out late at night these days." Everyone nodded in agreement. My grandfather took a pack of cigarettes from his pocket, wrapped one up, lit it, took a puff, then stood up and straightened Duong's sleeve. He walked back to the ancestral altar and muttered a few words before scooping up a handful of burnt incense ash. Then he turned back to Duong, using the ash to apply to the wound where the bone fragments had stuck. My grandfather patted his shoulder and said, "You can rest assured now. I've used the ancestral incense ash to cover the bone fragments temporarily. It won't find you for the time being. Wait until after the death anniversary, and I'll find a way to help you get through this. But you must remember not to go to that cemetery again." "I understand now, grandfather, but earlier you mentioned it was only temporary. What did you mean by that?" "Actually, I just relied on the power of our ancestors to shield you from this vengeful spirit. Its grudge is too heavy, so even I am somewhat powerless against it. But rest assured, I will try to find someone to help you." "Thank you, grandfather. You're welcome. You're like my own child, and you're also my grandson's friend." After saying this, my grandfather laughed heartily. Long couldn't resist asking, "How do you know so much about this? Are you a sorcerer?" "You're mistaken, my children. In fact, everything I've said is just knowledge passed down from a close friend of mine." "So, this friend of yours is the sorcerer?" "Exactly. He's a very skilled sorcerer, but with a peculiar personality. Everyone calls him Master Nam." "Well, that's a relief. If he's your friend, then Duong will be saved. It's safe to say Duong is very lucky indeed. What do you mean by that? I don't quite understand, Fuang said, almost rubbing her eyes. Was he born at 9 a.m. on September 9th? Do you know about this too? At this point, my grandfather truly believed the old man was telling the truth, and this also meant that his grandson was indeed facing real danger. He lowered his voice. May I ask if you're a sorcerer? Just call me Nam Nyan, that'll do. Your grandson's astrological chart is extremely rare. He's a target for demons and spirits everywhere, and that's why they all want to harm him. Then I hope Master Nam will find a way to save him. I'll be forever grateful. Saving him is possible, but I have one condition, and it's also the only way to save him. Any condition is acceptable, please tell me. He must become my disciple. If being accepted as your disciple brings blessings for him for generations, then I agree. Wait, please think carefully before you answer me. Once he becomes my disciple, he can't marry. That's an ancient rule. What do you mean he can't marry? That's correct. My grandfather was shocked to hear Master Nam say this. If his son couldn't marry, then who would carry on the family line? He discussed with Long's parents, and ultimately, they agreed to the condition because there was no other choice. Then he said, right now he's still too young to learn the ways of the Tao. I'll give him an amulet of protection. This amulet can ward off evil spirits for 10 years. He can stay and take care of his parents. 10 years from now, on this exact date, bring him to me. But remember, he must always carry this amulet with him, or he'll face difficult times. But how will we find Master Nam in 10 years? Don't worry about that. When the time comes, I'll send someone to inform you of my whereabouts. Now, I must go and exorcise demons for others. After saying that, he left, but he stayed in the village for another year to exorcise demons for more people. Only then did he vanish without a trace. Just a few days ago, someone came to inform us of his whereabouts. Tomorrow is the appointed day when Long must go to accept Master Nam as his mentor, and at that time, I will accompany him to seek assistance. After hearing the story, everyone understood the reason behind it. However, I found it utterly meaningless that just because of some words from a fake god or demon, my grandmother made me wear this amulet for 10 years. Now, I have to accept this person as my mentor, deceiving people everywhere. Most hateful of all is that I can no longer marry. It's truly unfair. I thought to myself that when I meet him, I'll give him a piece of my mind for deceiving others. That evening, after dinner, everyone had gone to bed, but I couldn't sleep. So I got up, put on a light jacket, and went out to sit in the courtyard, gazing at the stars and breathing in the fresh air. As I stepped out of the door, I saw Jia Han sitting alone, crying with her head bowed. She must have just had an argument with her boyfriend. I walked over and sat down beside her, silently watching her cry. The night air was chilly, so I quickly took off my jacket and draped it over her shoulders. We didn't speak. She continued to cry, and I felt the sky was too empty today. The next day, the festivities lasted until late afternoon. After tidying up, my grandfather called me over and instructed, "You and your friends need to get ready quickly. It's getting dark soon. Master Nam has arranged to meet you at the edge of the forest near the lotus pond. Go straight along the trail to get there. Be careful." Although I didn't want to go at all, I couldn't argue with my grandfather's words, so I reluctantly followed along, feeling extremely resentful. Despite that, I had a plan in mind. When I meet him, I'll expose him in front of everyone. So we set off along the dirt path towards the lotus pond. By the time we reached the pond, it was dark. We climbed onto a nearby 3-leaf boat and started rowing. Tonight was close to the full moon, so its dim light shone through the coconut trees, casting shadows on the rippling surface of the pond. The Lotus Pond used to be the site of fierce battles between our people and the American soldiers, so it has claimed many lives. Locals in our village whisper to each other that every night they can hear laughter coming from the pond, even though no one goes near it. If it weren't for our boat, the water would have been eerily silent. Thanks to this trip, I discovered that Long was even more cowardly than a girl. Throughout the evening, he kept clinging to Phuong's hand, which made me unable to suppress my laughter. Our boat continued to glide through the smooth water. Han playfully stirred the water with her hand. Suddenly, Han screamed and fell backward towards the middle of the boat, almost tipping it over. I stopped rowing and shone my flashlight on Han's pale, shocked face. I stepped closer to her and asked, "Han, what happened?" She stammered, Someone just grabbed Han's hand underwater." Hearing this, I immediately shone the flashlight into the water and saw a coconut husk floating nearby. I breathed a sigh of relief. "Han, look, it's just a coconut husk. Nothing to worry about." But there was clearly a cold hand grabbing my hand. "Don't think too much. Let's keep going." I resumed rowing, and Han no longer dared to play with the water. Finally, we reached the shore, and we had to trek along a narrow trail. Trees on both sides intertwined like a maze. Occasionally, we heard the rustle of forest animals, making everyone jump. The forest retained its primitive nature, blending with the musty air of decaying trees. After walking for a while, the flashlight suddenly went out, plunging the surroundings into darkness. Long and Phuong's fear of ghosts resurfaced, and they clung to me so tightly that I could hardly breathe. Phuong quickly suggested that we all hold hands to avoid getting lost, and everyone agreed. We walked for a long time until we saw the moonlight peeking through. We stopped to rest, and Phuong turned to Han, asking, "Han, you were really scared earlier. Why were you squeezing my hand so tightly? It hurt like hell. And your hand was freezing cold." Han was bewildered. "I've been walking beside you the whole time." Hearing this, Phuong couldn't stand it anymore and collapsed to the ground, crying uncontrollably. At this moment, the flashlight suddenly turned back on. Without thinking much, I turned the light towards Phuong's arm and saw clear bruising shaped like fingerprints on her skin. Han rushed over to help Phuong up. At that moment, I was somewhat startled. Who could have caused such large bruises? Lost in thought, I suddenly remembered that only the old man could play such tricks. Surely, he wanted to scare us into believing in him. The more I thought about it, the more I wanted to quickly meet him and give him a piece of my mind. With determination, I urged everyone forward, then hurried ahead. Everyone followed suit. I dashed through the night, ignoring the calls of my friends. After a while, I noticed flickering lights emanating from a wooden house ahead. The house seemed to have been built ages ago, with weathered walls and a dilapidated thatched roof. In front stood a massive fern, its fronds spanning several arms' lengths. Next to the trunk, I spotted a small shrine. Curiosity piqued. I cautiously approached. Peering into the shrine, I saw several broken clay figurines and some peculiar shiny black stones. Two flickering candles cast eerie shadows on the faces of the figurines, making them even more menacing. "These are the gods of fortune. The homeowner discarded them here. I've invited them to stay with me," a whisper came from behind, startling me. I quickly turned around to see an elderly man with a rugged face but eyes full of wisdom. In his hands, he held a tray of rice soup, a small bundle of incense, and several golden-colored large banknotes. I guessed that this must be the Thai Nam my grandfather had mentioned. He gave me a glance before sitting down and placing the offerings in the shrine. Lighting the incense, he continued to burn the banknotes. Please, join us for a meal, he muttered. After finishing, he stood up, brushed off some dust from his robe, and said, "If you treat them well, they will never forget your kindness. But if the homeowner mistreats them and encounters misfortune, he will blame these deities and cast them away heartlessly, unaware that they have quietly helped him many times. Evil begets evil. That is karma." "Are you Thaynam?" I asked. Just as I finished, my friends arrived. Long exclaimed, "Why are you running like you've seen a ghost?" Before I could reply, Thaynam chuckled softly, cautioning Long, "Don't mention them at night. They'll come looking for you." Long quickly raised his hand to cover his mouth and looked around nervously. Han, being quick-witted, understood. "Is it you, Thaynam?" "I've been waiting for you all for a long time. Come inside and let's talk," he replied. He walked into the house, and we followed suit. His house only had 2 smoke lamps placed on a shelf stuck to the house's post, and a few candle lamps on a wooden table in the corner, which I assumed was his workbench. On the table was a large bronze incense burner still emitting smoke, and above it were many porcelain jars of various sizes, all sealed with red paper inscribed with cryptic characters. Each jar was also cushioned with a circular piece of golden paper. Next to it was a large statue with a fierce, red-faced expression and a beard resembling a character from the 3 kingdoms. On either side of the large statue were 2 smaller, solemn-looking statues, likely guardians. The house's ceiling was draped in green and red cloth, akin to a traveling peddler's wares. In front of the table were 2 lively-looking Qilin figurines, and on the table were 7 beautifully crafted lotus-shaped oil lamps, along with various ceremonial items neatly arranged. The walls were adorned with various oddities, such as magic mirrors, mystical swords, and talismans. On the side table were small bronze statues in different poses, about the size of a palm, giving the space an eerie feeling, as if someone was standing behind you. Apart from the chirping of frogs, all we could hear was each other's breathing. Thaynam invited us to sit down and then inquired, "Why are you all so late?" Long was about to explain everything, but I interjected sharply. "My grandfather sent me here to meet you, so I had to come. Now that we've met, I'll take my leave. I'm sorry, but I cannot fulfill the role of your disciple. We came here hoping you wouldn't come looking for us again. Farewell." After saying this, I turned to leave, but he spoke up. "It's almost midnight now. The talisman I gave you 10 years ago, precisely at midnight tonight, will no longer be effective. If you step out of here, I can't guarantee what will happen to you. Trust me. I don't need your concern. All I ask is that you don't bother my family anymore. Let's go, everyone." Fuang saw this and furrowed her brows, advising me, "Wait a minute, Hao. Whether this is true or not, it's better to believe it than not. Haven't we encountered similar things on our journey?" "I think Fuang's right," Long chimed in. "These childish pranks are easily believed by everyone. It's clear he's playing a trick. If you all want to stay, feel free. I'll head back." I briskly walked towards the door and disappeared into the darkness, leaving everyone still hesitant about what to do. Thaynam sighed deeply. Perhaps it's fate. I'm not meant to be a teacher to this kid. Jia Han, anxious, immediately asked, "Master, what do you mean?" In truth, I intended to accept him as a disciple, partly because of his character. If he chose the path of exorcism, he would undoubtedly become a skilled sorcerer in the future, which would also help him ward off danger. But, Master, if that's the case, please help Hao. Despite his stubbornness, he's a good person. Isn't it true that he doesn't believe in me either? Is there any other way? If he doesn't believe, then you must make him believe. Isn't being a sorcerer also about helping people? After listening to Jia Han for a while, Thaynam relented and agreed to help. "All right, I concede, my child. It's almost midnight anyway. Let me write a talisman, and then you all can go and find him." Thay Nam quickly lit 3 incense sticks on the altar, then swiftly grabbed a rabbit hair brush and ink, writing swiftly like a sword dance. He murmured an incantation, barely audible, and in a flash, the talisman was finished. He handed it to Han and instructed, "Take this talisman and find him. If you meet him, bring him back here. If not, then it's his fate, and there's nothing more we can do." "I understand." Jia Han looked at Long and said, "Long, you go with me, while Phuong and Han stay back to tell Master Nam about what happened to Dung at the cemetery and ask for his help in dispelling the curse." "Let's go, Long." "Why me?" Long grumbled. "Hurry up, or it'll be too late." "All right, fine, let's go." So Long and Han dashed into the night to find me. When they reached the riverbank, they saw the boat was still there, immediately thinking I must still be somewhere in the forest. "Let's go back and search again. Hopefully nothing happens to Hao before we find him," Han said anxiously, quickly leading Long back into the forest to search. They ventured deep into the woods, calling out my name as they went. They searched through the thickets and bushes, but couldn't find me. After about an hour of searching in the cold, desolate darkness, they were almost desperate. Then, as Long sat panting, he noticed a large, shadowy figure looming faintly near the base of a nearby tree. He strained his eyes to see clearly, but the moonlight was obscured by clouds, making it difficult to discern. Swallowing hard to calm himself, he reached out and shook Han. "Isn't Hao sitting over there by the base of that tree?" Han turned to look in the direction of miserably. Long pointed. "I don't see anyone there." Her words only heightened Long's unease. "Seriously? He's sitting there, all black and ominous, and you don't see him?" "I really don't see anyone." "Give me the talisman," Long interrupted. Before Han could finish her sentence, Long snatched the talisman from her hand and held it out in front of him, slowly advancing towards the Vong tree. With each step, he moved closer to the base of the tree. When he was just a few steps away, the dark figure suddenly shot up the tree trunk, swaying back and forth for a moment before disappearing into the night. At that moment, Long tumbled to the ground in fear, crying out, "Ghost! Ghost! It's a ghost!" "Long, calm down. That's Hao." Hearing this, Long looked towards where Han was standing under the tree and saw her supporting me. I was lying motionless. Long shouted, "Hen, didn't you see anything just now?" Hao climbed up the tree and disappeared. What happened to Long? Earlier, there was a gust of wind, but apart from Hao lying on the ground, I didn't see anything. "Stop talking and come help Han," Phuong said. Long ran over to me. "Han, Hao has stopped breathing. Wait, it seems there's something in his mouth." After saying this, he reached into my mouth and pulled out a lot of foul-smelling mud. After removing all the mud, I coughed and vomited more mud. Now I could breathe normally again. Long lightly slapped my face a few times to fully wake me up. My head still hurt badly. Long asked, "What happened to you? Why were you lying here with mud in your mouth?" I squinted, trying to recall what happened when I left Master Nam's house. When I left, I walked straight along the path, feeling annoyed and intending to take the boat straight home. After a while, thick fog appeared ahead. It was strange, but I kept walking through the fog until I saw Han standing under a tree waving at me. At this point, Han and Long looked puzzled. I continued. Seeing her, I walked towards her, and then Han gave me some delicious hot buns. I kept eating them, not feeling full at all. After that, I don't remember anything else until I woke up and saw you both here. Look, these are the buns you ate. Long pointed to the pile of mud on the ground, causing us to feel like vomiting again. He added, "If Han and I hadn't arrived in time, that ghost would have taken you away to serve its masters." A ghost? I was perplexed by what Long said. "Let's go back to Master Nam's place, and I'll tell you everything from start to finish." "We shouldn't stay here any longer," Long said, and he and Han helped me turn back towards Master Nam's house. As for Duong's situation, after Han and Long went to look for me, Duong and Phuong recounted the entire story of what happened at the cemetery to Master Nam. Understanding the situation, he said, "Actually, 10 years ago, this demon wreaked havoc in our village, but we failed to capture it due to negligence, allowing it to escape. Since then, it hasn't appeared again until now. This time, it's an opportunity for us to capture it. Otherwise, our village won't have peace." "What do you mean by demon?" Duong asked, puzzled. "Those who die from illness, accidents, in general, those who die and don't undergo reincarnation will become ghosts. If they stay in the mortal realm and don't accept reincarnation, they become vengeful spirits. They hold grudges and become demons. The longer they live in the mortal realm, the stronger they become. We must capture them early, or many people will die because of them," Master Nam explained. "So the thing in the cemetery is a demon?" Duong asked. "Yes, that's right. Last time, if you hadn't survived, it would have been considered lucky," Master Nam affirmed. "How do we capture it then?" Phuong inquired. "We'll need your help," Master Nam replied. "This demon wants to lure you down with it, so this time we'll use you as bait to lure it out, and then I'll capture it." "Isn't that too risky, sir? Besides, I don't even have a girlfriend yet," Duong expressed concern. "If we don't do this, it won't reveal itself. Besides, you can trust that with me here, not a hair on your head will be harmed," Master Nam reassured. "All right then, I'll take the risk. What should I do?" Duong asked. "We'll discuss this once everyone is back," Master Nam said. A few minutes later, when we all returned, seeing that I was still alive, Master Nam nodded and remarked, "You're quite resilient. You wish for my death just to prove your point." "I still don't believe you," I retorted defiantly, though inwardly I harbored some doubt about whether ghosts were real. Seeing me argue back, Master Nam grew heated and turned to the others, saying, See? I tried to help him, but he's still stubborn. If even this boy wants to be my disciple, I won't accept." "Who wants to be your disciple? Faking ghosts and demons to deceive people. How ridiculous," I countered. "See, even now, he still doesn't believe in ghosts." "I've tried everything," Long chimed in. "I've seen it 3 times already, and it's not fake. I've never seen it, so I don't believe. How about you call the spirit of my friend who died in a car accident a few days ago? He was also my classmate. If you can summon him in front of me, then I'll believe in ghosts, and I'll bow down to you as my master," I challenged Master Nam. Upon hearing this, Master Nam's face flushed red with anger. He clenched his fists and said, "This brat has quite the mouth. Fine, I'll wait for your bowing down." "Good, it's not too late to do it," I retorted proudly. "So when will I see your abilities?" "Right now. But first, you need to tell me the name and birth date of the deceased person. I can only summon their spirit with that information," Master Nam replied. So, I provided him with the name and birth date of my deceased friend. Master Nam then instructed us to assist him in setting up an altar outside in the courtyard, filled with various offerings, giving off an air of mystical authority. Despite his efforts, I couldn't help but secretly chuckle at his theatrics. Once everything was prepared, Master Nam instructed everyone to go inside and close the doors tightly, leaving only him and me behind, because he feared that the excessive yang energy would prevent spirits from appearing. Then, he made me sit on a chair placed in front of the altar, opposite an empty chair with a flat sand tray next to it. Above the sand tray was a bamboo stick hanging straight down to touch the sand's surface. I wondered what purpose this item served. Then Master Nam began lighting incense, chanting a mantra, and performing ritualistic gestures around the altar. He then burned a few prepared golden talismans, took a large gulp of wine, and sprayed it onto a small stone on the table. Suddenly, a strong gust of wind blew from nowhere, swirling dust into the air. Master Nam stood still, his eyes rolled back, sweat dripping from his forehead, before shouting loudly, "Spiritual beings, heed my command, guide the lost souls back to meet us." Throughout the ceremony, I was fixated on Master Nam's gestures. When I finally looked at the empty chair in front of me, I was speechless and lacked the strength to flee. Before me was the blurry image of my recently deceased friend, who had lost half of his head in the accident, blood still oozing, his face pale and eyes sunken, his hair damp from the rain that had fallen during the accident. His lifeless gaze sent shivers down my spine, and although I wanted to run, I was too weak. Suddenly, I heard a rustling sound coming from the sand tray. Slowly, I glanced over to see the bamboo stick moving automatically, writing words on the sand surface. Though terrified, I forced myself to read the message. It said, "Why are you looking for me? Come down with me." After reading it, I couldn't stay seated any longer. I fell off the chair, trembling, and crawled away from it. Looking up from the ground, I could still see the bamboo stick moving, but I lacked the courage to stand up and read further. Unexpectedly, my friend stood up angrily from the chair, glaring at me fiercely before flying straight toward me. Terrified, I instinctively raised my arm to shield my face. After a while of silence, I cautiously lowered my arm, but there was nothing there. The wind had ceased blowing. Master Nam approached me, smiling broadly, and asked, "So, do you believe now?" I stood up, brushing off the sand clinging to my body. Without saying a word, my face grim, and walked back into the house. Master Nam chuckled and followed me inside. At that moment, I felt extremely embarrassed for letting him see my fearful expression earlier. Thankfully, my friends hadn't witnessed that moment, or else I'd probably have crawled into a hole out of embarrassment. Seeing me enter the house with anger, Long immediately asked, "What happened out there?" I didn't feel like answering him. Master Nam smiled and said, "This time you've lost to me, so hurry up and pay your respects to your master." Although I now believed in the existence of spirits, I couldn't swallow my anger at losing face like that. I remained defiant, saying, "Fine, I'll accept you as my master on one condition. If you don't agree, I won't be your disciple, even if it costs me my life." "What condition? Let's hear it," Master Nam replied. "Here's the condition. You must immediately abandon the rule that disciples cannot marry." "That's absolutely out of the question. The rules of the sect have been passed down for generations by our ancestors. We cannot change them just because of one person's whim," Master Nam retorted, appearing displeased with my request. "Well then, can you explain why such a peculiar rule was established in the first place?" I questioned. "To be honest, I'm not entirely sure, but it's a rule passed down by our ancestors, and it's the duty of disciples to obey," Master Nam explained. "I'm not trying to disrespect our ancestors, but isn't it unreasonable to impose such a rule on future generations just because of personal reasons, such as a grudge against women?" I countered. "How dare you insult our ancestors?" Master Nam exclaimed. "I'm just expressing my thoughts. Rules are made by humans and can be changed by humans. If you remain so conservative, how can our sect progress?" "Now I understand why you haven't had a disciple until now," I concluded. "You're talking nonsense. I simply don't want to accept you. There's no shortage of people willing to become my disciple." "In short, the rules cannot be changed," Master Nam asserted firmly. "If that's the case, then there's no other way. Let's go back, everyone," I said, preparing to leave. Just as I was about to step out of the door, "Hold on," Han called out to me, then ran over to Master Nam. "Master, please reconsider. How is right? If some rules are changed by humans, it shouldn't be a big deal. Haven't you said before that if Hanthun Dung enters the sect, he'll become a great master, helping many people, including fighting evil spirits? If our ancestors in heaven knew that you changed the rules to accept a talented disciple, they wouldn't blame you, Han reasoned. Hearing Han's persuasive words, Master Nam fell into deep thought for a while. Then he approached the ancestral altar, lit 3 incense sticks, and murmured something to himself. When he turned back to me, he said, "All right, today I'll break the rules and agree to your request. I hope our ancestors will understand and not blame me. But don't think that once you've gotten your way, you can do whatever you want. After entering the sect, you must obey my instructions without question. As long as you accept my condition, I'll listen to you," I replied. "All right, then in 2 days on the full moon, we'll hold a ceremony to officially recognize you as my disciple." Now, everyone seemed relieved that everything had been resolved satisfactorily. However, there was still one matter to discuss. Master Nam stroked his beard thoughtfully and said, "What worries me now is the situation with Dung. If we don't intervene to capture the demon trying to harm him before this month's full moon, it will become much stronger, making it much harder to capture." "So what should we do, Master Nam?" Fung asked. "It's already late and it's not safe to go home now. The spirits in the marsh are gathering, making it very dangerous to go out. Let's stay here tonight. Tomorrow morning, we need to quickly prepare some necessary items to help Dung," Master Nam suggested. After that, Master Nam led us into the house. I noticed that Dung seemed melancholic and worried, but I resolved not to let any harm come to my friends. So, we all hurried off to gather the items as instructed by Master Nam. When we got home, I directed Long to go to the back of my garden to cut bamboo and thorns, while the willow branches were already in front of the house. As for Fung, I showed him the way to the neighboring village to buy a rooster and iron mesh. Dung was tasked with going to the nearby clothing store to find what Master Nam had instructed. The most challenging task at the moment was to find an ink-black dog. In our village, pure black dogs were rare, so Han and I quickly went to Mr. Bay's house, a well-known dog seller in the neighboring commune. He had a pure black dog that he had been raising for nearly 2 years. Initially, he was reluctant to sell, but after our persistent pleading and offering a generous price, he finally agreed. With everything in hand, we made it back to Master Nam's house just in time. Upon arrival, we found Master Nam already prepared, with the altar neatly set up. He instructed me to hold the rooster while Long used a knife to let the chicken's blood flow into a bowl. After obtaining the chicken's blood, Master Nam took a rabbit hairbrush and recited a few words before quickly writing on the golden and silver papers with intricate, difficult-to-read characters. I assumed they were ancient script characters. After finishing, Master Nam called Dung over and moistened the iron mesh on him before cutting it into the shape of a garment. He then sprinkled some blood from the black dog onto the mesh garment and held 3 incense sticks, writing in the air. Despite closing his eyes, he continued to murmur incantations. After he finished, he called us closer and said, "Tonight is a crucial night. Whether we capture the evil spirit or not depends entirely on you all." "What do you mean, Master? We're not quite clear," Han asked, confused. "All right, I'll explain the plan in detail so that you all understand and can follow it accordingly. To prevent the demon from sensing our intentions and hiding, we will set up the ritual here tonight. The most important task is entrusted to you, Dung. You must lure the female demon here. Once she's here, we'll have a way to capture her, ensuring she can't escape," Master Nam explained. Hearing this, Dung's face turned pale with fear. He trembled and said, "Me? How do I lure her here, Master? Without you there, if she finds out, I might lose my life." So, the plan was for Dung to lure the demon while Hun and I went to her grave, waiting for about half an hour. When Dung brought the demon here, we would immediately use hammers to dig a hole in the middle of her grave and bury it with a hollow bamboo stick. Then, we would pour all the black dog's blood into it and quickly return to assist Master Nam. "Why do we have to do that, Master?" Hun asked. "When we pour the black dog's blood into her bones, it will weaken her, making it easier to subdue her," Master Nam explained. "Got it," we replied, each of us carrying 2 talismans. After Master Nam finished instructing us, it was already getting dark. We were about to leave when Master Nam told us to wait until midnight, so we had to sit and wait. Meanwhile, Master Nam started arranging things, instructing Long and Fung to change into their ritual attire inside. Hun, Dung, and I sat outside, waiting to see what would happen. When Long and Fung emerged, the 3 of us burst into laughter, rolling on the floor with tears streaming down our faces. It turned out that their attire resembled actors in traditional Vietnamese theater, complete with elaborate makeup and vibrant colors. Thankfully, I had switched places with them. Otherwise, I would have looked quite odd too. Seeing us laughing, Long blushed with embarrassment, while Fung frowned and muttered, "Master Nam, isn't there a better outfit?" Master Nam chuckled lightly and replied, "This is the traditional attire. Even ghosts and demons fear it. There's no other outfit." Then he turned to me and said, "Don't laugh at others. As my disciple in the future, you'll have to wear it too." I nodded awkwardly. Finally, midnight arrived. Han, Dung, and I set out quietly, hurrying through the night. At this hour, everyone was asleep, and the road to the cemetery was deserted, eerily quiet. Only a few stray dogs or cats chased shadows across the street. Dung seemed very tense, his forehead sweating despite the chilly weather. "Is something going to happen to me? I'm really scared." His voice trembled. I looked at him and patted his shoulder reassuringly. "I won't let anything happen to you. I'll always be behind you, so don't worry," I said. He nodded, and we continued on our way. Finally, we reached the cemetery. I motioned for everyone to hide behind a nearby tree and turned to Dung, instructing him, "Now, follow the plan. Hun and I will stay here. You go to her grave and lure her out." Dung looked at me, swallowing nervously, his legs trembling as he moved towards the grave. He took cautious steps in the silent night, his shadow cast long on the ground by the half-moonlight. A gentle breeze stirred, causing dust to swirl in the air, obscuring the moonlight slightly. Arriving at the grave, he knelt down as instructed, placing incense sticks and trembling hands on the tombstone. He looked up at the engraved words and whispered, stumbling over the verse. "Lost, Queen Thi Yin? Born in 1950, if you open your heart and tie your fate with mine. Harmony between yin and yang. The world will change. Tranquility amidst the mountains. Wind rustling through the trees. If you reveal yourself, please appear." Though we were at a distance, I could hear Dung's invocation clearly in the wind. It struck me as odd that he would recite a full poem to summon a spirit when Master Nam had instructed him to only recite her name and birth date. I continued to observe, curious about the situation. After reciting it several times, the wind suddenly picked up, rustling the leaves everywhere. 3 incense sticks burst into bright flames. Dung was visibly frightened, but he remembered Master Nam's instructions and tried to remain still. Eventually, a female demon slowly emerged from the grave, her face pale and menacing, her decayed teeth looking terrifying. She had a large scar on her neck. Just as the demon appeared, Han almost screamed, but I managed to cover her mouth in time. The wind howled loudly as the demon let out a deafening roar. Then abruptly, the surroundings fell silent. Dung, his eyes closed in fear, slowly opened them and looked up. The demon was nowhere to be seen, replaced by the figure of a beautiful girl in a red dress, dancing gracefully on the grave. Dung looked down, but the demon's dress had disappeared. It seemed that the demon had agreed to Dung's request. Dung silently rejoiced and quickly prayed again. "If you agree to be my wife, please follow me." After saying that, he stood up, extinguished the 3 incense sticks, and slowly left the cemetery. Indeed, the female demon followed behind him. Witnessing everything, I felt a chill down my spine. I hadn't expected Dung to endure it so well. Turning to Jia Hun, I saw her standing motionless. I gently shook her to snap her out of her trance, then pulled her hand and ran towards the grave. Meanwhile, Dung was carrying 3 incense sticks towards the pond. His steps became slower due to fear. The female demon appeared and disappeared intermittently, sometimes behind him, sometimes in front, sometimes on a coconut tree branch. Dung dared not look up, only bowed his head and shuffled forward. Suddenly, he bumped into something and fell to the ground. When he looked up, it turned out to be Tu and Sao, 2 drunkards from the village stumbling back home together. Sao, annoyed by the collision, grabbed Dung's collar and yelled, "Are you blind? Can't you walk properly? You've made us fall and get hurt. You owe us 100,000 as compensation. If you don't pay, I'll beat you up." Before he could finish, Sao disappeared into the nearby bushes, leaving everyone bewildered. Tu, frightened, ran away. Dung, not understanding what had just happened, fearing to delay the plan, quickly moved on. Finally, he reached the pond. Silently jubilant, he boarded the boat and placed 3 incense sticks at the bow. The demon flew up and hovered there. Dung quickly started rowing. Right at this moment, it's been exactly half an hour since Dung left the cemetery. According to the plan, he should have reached the shore and entered the forest where the battlefield was set up. However, due to Dung's slow progress and the encounter with the drunken group, the timing deviated from the expected schedule. However, Hun and I were unaware of this, continuing our tasks as arranged. As the time approached, I grasped the sledgehammer and pounded it into the middle of the grave several times, creating a large hole. Then, I thrust the wooden stake into it with force. Thud. A resounding sound echoed, indicating that it was deep enough. I urged Han to pour the squid ink into the tube. At this very moment, Dung's boat had just reached a few fathoms away from the shore. The female demon, affected by the squid ink soaking into her bones, screamed loudly, transforming back into her original demonic form. Her agonizing screams pierced the dark night, causing the wind to pick up, trees to sway, and waves to rise in the pond. Dung's boat also rocked violently. The demon, realizing that Dung intended to harm her, flew straight at him, attempting to possess him and cause harm. However, she was repelled by the netted robe and amulet Dung wore underneath. This didn't possess Dung, but sent the demon flying off the boat into the pond. The female demon shrieked and swiftly flew back into the darkness, heading straight towards the cemetery where Hun and I were pouring squid ink onto her bones. Just as we had poured about half of the container, Han suddenly stopped pouring. I found it strange and was about to urge her to continue when I saw her gaping in horror, her hand trembling as she pointed behind me. Sensing something ominous, I slowly turned around, only to find the demon standing right behind me. Its long hair fluttered in the wind, its pale face contorted in anger. It bared its teeth and let out a roar, swatting me aside with a single blow, sending me flying several graves away, crashing into a cement tomb. The female demon then turned its attention to Han, seizing her tightly. With a pale face, I struggled to get up and ran towards it as fast as I could, pulling out the talisman my master had given me and striking it straight at its head. It let out a horrifying scream and was thrown far away. I quickly grabbed Han's hand and sprinted away. After running for a while, I glanced back and saw dust swirling around its grave. The bamboo sticks inserted into its grave slowly rose, then burst out of the ground. At that moment, I didn't look back anymore. I just knew I had to run for my life. When we reached the edge of the pond, there was no sign of Duong, only his boat floating nearby. I felt extremely worried because I knew something had happened. Hun and I rushed onto the boat and paddled a few strokes when suddenly there was a loud noise. Something from the bottom of the pond lunged at us, almost tipping our boat over. After steadying myself, I looked closely and realized it was Duong. We joyfully pulled him onto the boat. He coughed repeatedly from ingesting water. After a while, he regained consciousness, and I immediately asked, "What happened to you?" He took a deep breath and replied, "When I was thrown into the pond, I tried to stay submerged, not daring to surface. After a while, when I finally dared to come up, I didn't see the demon anymore. I held onto the boat to rest for a while before attempting to climb back up. Suddenly, a cold hand grabbed my leg and pulled me forcefully underwater. It dragged me straight down to the bottom, and despite my struggles, I couldn't escape its slippery grip. After a while, I couldn't hold my breath any longer. In a moment of desperation, I remembered the talisman Thoi Num had given me in my pocket. I quickly pulled it out and stuck it onto its hand. Immediately, it let go, allowing me to surface and meet you guys. Hun added quickly, "Let's hurry." I urged, "Let's go quickly." "Wait a minute. There's one more thing I want to ask you," I said. "Where did you come up with the incantation you recited earlier?" "I just thought of it myself," Dung replied. "I figured doing that would make the invocation more sincere and the demon more likely to appear." "You're really something else," I muttered as I quickly paddled to the other shore. The sounds of branches colliding in the distance signaled that the demon had followed us. I urged everyone to run as fast as possible back home. We sprinted through the dark night, our legs almost giving out, while the wind grew louder. When I glanced back, I saw a white figure swiftly flying behind us. I used every ounce of my strength to run. Luckily, we made it home just in time. By then, the demon had fallen into the spiritual array. My master was standing at the entrance, and when the demon stopped in its tracks and roared in the wind, it seemed to recognize him. It was about to flee when suddenly Long and Fung emerged from the darkness, wielding 2 branches of silk cotton tree, and pulled it back into the array. They stood firmly at the rear entrance, leaving it no way to escape. At this moment, Master Num quickly recited a spell and made quick hand gestures. The demon writhed and screamed in agony. Master Num swiftly threw a talisman at it, causing it to roar once more before plunging into the darkness and disappearing. Everything fell silent again. Dung eagerly turned to Master Num and asked, "Master, it's gone now." Master calmly replied, "Rest assured, once it falls into my array, there's no way out. This is a formation using the 5 elements as seals and the gatekeepers as arrays. The 5 elements consist of the metal unicorn guarding the west, the white tiger guarding the east, the azure dragon guarding the south, the black tortoise guarding the north, and the vermilion bird guarding the center. The gatekeepers here are 2 spirits of goodness and punishment. I used the bodies of Long and Fung to summon their spirits to guard the demon's escape route. In fact, this demon didn't escape, but merely hid somewhere among those bushes, waiting for us to let our guard down so it could seize the opportunity to flee." "So how do we catch it then, Master?" I asked, intrigued. Master Num smiled and turned to me. "Now it's time for you to show me if you have what it takes to be my disciple," Master Num declared. "What do you mean, Master?" I asked. Without answering, Master Num turned to Hun and asked her to bring out a jar of rice from the house. He then broke off a willow branch and stuck it into the jar, burying a talisman underneath. Then he looked at me and said, "Take the jar of rice." I awkwardly complied, still not fully understanding what was going on. Master Num continued, "This is how we'll find it. Take this jar of rice and step into the array. Follow the direction indicated by the willow branch. If the branch points to a certain direction, that's where the demon is hiding. When you get close, the rice in the jar will automatically spill out. At that moment, use this willow branch to strike where it's hiding. The female demon will surely reveal herself." Although I considered myself brave, what had just happened made me feel a bit uneasy. This was the first time in my life I had to face something science didn't acknowledge, something I had never believed in before. Yet here I was, contradicting all my previous thoughts. After hesitating for a few seconds, I began to step into the array. The air became stifling, almost suffocating. I glanced at Long, who was usually timid but now seemed completely different. He stood still, motionless, with unblinking eyes. One hand held a silk cotton branch horizontally across his head, while the other formed a seal, looking solemn. Fung was the same. I looked around at the surroundings, and then down at the willow branch. Suddenly, the willow branch began to move slowly, turning its head to my left. I quickly looked up and saw a large bush of bamboo leaves in front of me. As I approached the bush, I could hear the sound of bamboo stems rubbing against each other, making a rustling noise. The willow branch in my hand began to tremble slightly, and the rice in the jar started to spill out on its own. At this point, my cold sweat began to trickle down, and I held my breath, gripping the willow branch tightly, and struck forcefully at the bamboo trunk. Suddenly, a painful roar echoed throughout the night, and the bamboo branches thrashed violently against each other. Suddenly, a large branch of bamboo curved down and struck me, sending me flying. The jar of rice spilled onto the ground, and my hand hit a sharp rock, leaving a long gash. Before I could regain my composure, a white figure lunged out from the bamboo bush. I panicked and raised my hand to defend myself, but another roar sounded. I slowly opened my eyes and looked ahead to see.